What's up, everybody? We're back at it again with another UFC video. Today we're going to be talking about my least favorite to favorite UFC pay-per-view cards. We will be discussing, I think the UFC had 12 pay-per-view events this year. We'll be ranking them, in my opinion, from worst to best, just based off of, what I thought of the fights, who was fighting, and the performances had. Yeah, so let's jump right into it and start off with UFC 279. Alright, this was my least favorite event of the year. Now, by least favorite, notice that I'm not saying bad, because it wasn't bad. It's pretty hard for the UFC to make a bad pay-per-view, except they did it with 284. Anyways, this fight card, it was pretty good. There was no championship fight, though. And I said sloppy main event because they both, Tony Ferguson and Nate Diaz, they both looked old in there. They both looked aged and like they shouldn't fight again. And of course, the reason that they fought is because Khamzat Chimaev made the card a shit show, and he put the card into shambles, basically. And, worst of all, Li Jingliang was robbed. He was robbed against Daniel Rodriguez. Oh, you guys didn't see that? Scrolling for another monitor. But, yeah, Daniel Rodriguez beat Li Jingliang. And I feel like that was one of the biggest robberies this year that people kind of forget to talk about. So, yeah, that's what I think of that card. Next up, as you don't know, we have UFC 282. Now, if this went through with Prochazka and Glover too, it'd be way better. But that didn't happen, so it sucks. Just kidding. It didn't suck, but the title fight, it was a draw between Jan and Magomed, and it was an okay fight. It was kind of boring though, but I see how some people could like it. Paddy the Baddy. Okay, this kind of exposed his skill level, and it showed that he's not really that talented. As in, like, he's not going to be able to hang with top 5 guys. Like, he's going to get fucked as soon as he fights a good striker. And also, just his arrogance was in full effect on this card. Talking about fight of the night, talking about how he won every round when he clearly lost the fight. Horrible robbery. Oh my god, sorry, I keep scrolling. You guys didn't see that. But, other than that, though, it was a good card because everything was a finish until the last 2 fights, which was the light heavyweight draw and Paddy Pimblett fight. And then Darren Till. Every time you want him to win and you think, like, oh, you know what, he's actually looking pretty good. Like, yeah, Darren Till might win this. He fucks it up. He goes out there and finds a way to just completely fuck it up for himself. And this was no different. So, with that being said, UFC 272 was a pretty boring event. There was no championship fight here. It was supposed to be Volkanovski and Max Holloway, but that didn't happen. So we got Covington and Masvidal as the pay-per-view main event. And I was actually pretty excited for this fight. I thought it was going to be pretty good, but it was kind of boring, The fight didn't suck. It was an okay fight, but it just wasn't very entertaining, And there was no other real notable fight on this card. The co-main was a catchweight bout between Rafael Dos Anjos and Renato Moicano, which, like, good fighters and stuff, like, it's fun and all, but that's not a pay-per-view. It's just not. Bryce Mitchell and Edson Barboza was on the card. That was a good fight. Kevin Holland was on the card. So not horrible, but it's just, more of a fight night. You know what I mean? So, UFC 277. This card was actually pretty good. Yeah. Amanda Nunes put on an absolute clinic against Juliana Pena. She had nothing for her. So no, that's cool. The flyweight title fight between Kai Kara France and Brandon Moreno, that was also a pretty good fight. Brandon Moreno got a nice solid win and a little interim belt out of it, and it set up his 4th fight with Davison. So, pretty good card, but Also on this card, we had Sergey Pavlovich knock out Derek Lewis in the first round, but it was kind of a, sloppy finish, or like an early stoppage. And yeah, there was also Magomed Ankalaev defeating Anthony Smith on this card, so that's always good to see. UFC 270. This card had the biggest boys and the smallest boys of the UFC, and actually it was the only championship fight for those weight classes, if we're not counting the interim championship for flyweight. It was the only heavyweight championship fight and the only flyweight championship fight, and they were both decisions, and they were the only big fights on there. Nothing else too notable, so that's why it's here. But it was an entertaining fight between Francis and Cyril. We saw Francis Nurmagomedov come out, and there he is there. And look at the people in the back here. They're like, oh shit. Look at these guys in the air. Anyways, UFC 271. UFC 271, it was an alright card. It was nothing too crazy, but Derek Lewis unfortunately was finished on this card as well in Houston, just like the last one. So that sucks for him. What was Israel Adesanya and Robert Whittaker? That was a good fight. Kind of boring, kind of a Izzy's kind of a decision machine, let's be real here. And yeah, that's about it for this card. UFC 274. I love Charles Oliveira, and this made me really, really like sorry, I keep scrolling on my mouse. This made me really like Charles Oliveira because, man, he had a crazy performance against Justin Gaethje. And this card actually sold 400,000 pay-per-views. And so that makes Oliveira, Oliveira's obviously not huge, but he's a pretty big star for the UFC. And we don't even have to say much about the co-main. You guys know it was the most boring fight of all time. So that's that. And then Chandler and Ferguson was a good fight, Sucked to see Ferguson get knocked out, but it is what it is. UFC 278. This card was, it was top heavy, let's be real. It was the top three we were really watching, or at least me. I watch every pay-per-view, and I try and watch every, I don't watch every prelim, but I try and watch everything on the main cards. So some of these fights I just don't remember, because some of these guys, Harry Hunsucker doesn't even have a Wikipedia page, and he lost to Tyson Pedro that night. So it's like, how do I take that serious? But, Jose Aldo's retirement fight, Paulo Costa defeated Luke Rockhold in his retirement fight, and obviously Leon Edwards shocked the world with the head kick knockout in the last minute to get the championship. And yeah, this was a pretty good one. I really liked watching it. I really liked the environment in the Salt Lake arena. They got hyped for Leon, which is good because Leon deserves that. And I'm sure England is going to get even more hyped. We'll be talking about that next year when we rank the cards for this year. Okay, next. UFC 276. Okay. Now I put this one above the last one because it just had more names on it. We had Israel Adesanya defeat Jared Cannonier. Obviously, that was a pretty boring fight. Alexander Volkanovski beat the shit out of Max Holloway, with all due respect, 50-45 them. Alex Pereira, he got himself in the top 5 by knocking out Sean Strickland. And unfortunately, Robbie Lawler was defeated on this card by knockout. So that's pretty sad. And then Sean O'Malley, no contest against Pedro Munoz. So, it was a pretty good card. It was the International Fight Week card. I had a bunch of buddies over for it, but we were underwhelmed by Adesanya. UFC 273. Okay, UFC 273, I thought it was a pretty solid card, man. Khamzat Chimaev really, like I said, it was his coming out party. where we really saw what he's made of against a top welterweight, and he proved himself, you know. Aljamain Sterling defeated Petr Yan, which I was kind of happy about, just to see him win and Petr Yan lose, because everyone was like, Petr Yan by whatever he wants, but I was like, hey, Aljamain can do it, and he did it. And then, of course, Volkanovski put on a masterclass against the Korean Zombie. Wasn't even close. And, yeah, put an absolute beating on him. Anyways, UFC 275. There we go. UFC 275 was a pretty good event, man. We got a fight of the year in the main event. Valentina Shevchenko had a close title fight, which didn't happen until that point. And Zhang Weili got the highlight of a lifetime in what was a good fight until the stoppage, but with Joanna. This was a good card, man. This was in Singapore, and, you know, I mean, really, like, what stole the show is the main event, you know. All we really got to say is that main event. Which brings me to my number one pay-per-view of the year. UFC 281. It was the best card of the year, no doubt, in my opinion. We had Alex Pereira beat Israel Adesanya for the middleweight title. Alex Pereira is in my top 3 favorite fighters right now, so obviously I like that. Zhang Weili, she recaptured her title off of Carla Esparza. You know, wasn't too surprised there.